You've got to have a mindset that you just get on with it. And it sounds trivial, but I spent so long worrying and existential and stressed. And sometimes that was making me work harder, so it was okay.
Alrighty, hello everyone, and welcome to the Deal Maker Show. So today we have an amazing founder. A founder that it's unbelievable, the story. We're gonna be talking about the building, the financing, the scaling. I mean, all of that good stuff that we like to hear. And I think that today you're gonna find the conversation quite inspiring. So without further ado, let's welcome our guest today, Ben Freeman. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So originally born there in Manchester, near Manchester, there in England. So give us a walk through memory lane. How was life growing up for you?
Yeah, so I was actually born in Cheshire. That's where I was brought up, which is about half an hour of Manchester. It's basically, if you've not been, it's kind of British countryside, particularly where I was brought up. So lots of space around me. So a very pleasant place to be brought up. That's why I love nature and animals today. But you're near enough to Manchester to understand big cities and what that's like. And it's kind of a warm up to London. It's like a smaller, slightly beta version. If you look at kind of the businesses and the way the economy works there. So no, I love my upbringing. And then I moved to London to study initially, but kept my business in Manchester. So lots of traveling for me in the earlier years.
And also lots of ideas, lots of projects. Even before you turn 18, you were quite the entrepreneur. What do you think that drive comes from for you?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because honestly, as a kid, I think I was just obsessed with money. I remember being like, I don't know when it started, probably like 11 or 12, but I just thought it was really cool to try and get rich. I'd say that's faded over time. Like now the reasons I do things are less about money and there are other parameters you consider, right? But in my earlier years, I just liked hustling and trying to make some money. So I was always selling stuff or doing stuff. I think my dad probably ingrained that into me to some degree. He believed in hard work. Like he's a lawyer, so he thought I should be a lawyer. But more importantly, he taught me work ethic. But I chose to do that for kind of ways that could, at the time, make me money, whatever that meant. And it was weirdly, being from kind of Manchester, the businesses are more traditional businesses. A lot of people are in retail or heavy industry. This whole tech and venture-backed thing was totally new to me when I moved to London. Like I was clueless at the time. So that meant I was brought up believing in kind of like proper businesses in inverted commas, like you have to make a profit, you have to look after people a certain way. So I kind of came from a slightly different background that I've then tried to bring into tech.
That's amazing. Now, we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Now, one thing that it will be awesome, because on the first real business, you dropped out of school. It was this events business. I think that it will be awesome, to really understand what was the biggest takeaway or the biggest lesson that you learned from that business.
Yeah, there's a lot. And this was many years ago now. So the story there is I finished high school and I'd done some side hustles throughout. I was trading vehicle number plates and all sorts of things to kind of make money here and there. And then my first proper business, as I describe it, was in the summer after I graduated from high school. And it was this events company. And I ended up doing that for quite a few years. And it kind of, I suppose, what did I learn from it? Look, we got to a decent scale in many ways. The main thing I learned is that you have to select the business you build to a great degree based on the market and what it can become. Because a lot of people tell you, follow your passions or do what you understand, solve problems That's incredibly limiting if you don't know that much. I was young and you'd never start a B2B SaaS company, right? If you're solving problems for corporates. I didn't know what corporate was. So I think back then I was trying to solve problems I understood. There were so many learnings because at the time I was employing, I'll give you a couple of stories, but I was like employing people much older than me. And one problem I had, for example, was when you run different events, you have to run the doors. You need bouncers or doormen to keep your events secure. And it turns out if you go to companies, those doormen have deals with the local drug dealers or gangs. So they let certain people in and they're controlling your door and they might be making some money on the side. If you're not in control of that, you face risk. There could be violence that you don't see coming, or they could take the money or whatever. So I ended up doing that in-house. We built a security company as well. And I made a little margin on the doorman I was kind of renting out. So I kind of realized quite young the importance of trust and working with people that you can kind of get on with. And it was a weird way to learn the lesson, but because I was young and probably looked quite exploitable, I actually think I was looking back, I think I was quite savvy and like I looked young. And at the time, like for Manchester, I was basically like a posh kid in Manchester. But probably a lot of people were trying to screw me over. And so that was a lesson. But yeah, the main lesson, if I have to choose one, is just that it was a shit market. If you look at the most successful events company owners in the world, the magnitude of their businesses, or the scale of the wealth they create for other people and the economy in general is so much smaller than if you look at even a mid-tier tech company. So I just think there's an element of like choosing your market, decide the impact you want to have on that market, on society, on the economy, on people. And you can put smart people in a shit market and the outcome's not going to be that inspiring.
I mean, I think that you're right on. I think that for founders listening to, like choosing a market that is big enough, choosing a market that also is growing at a really nice rate, it makes all the difference. Yeah, and that's really where magic happens, where you're able to plug in an awesome team. I guess for you to, like right after this, you ended up moving to London for university. I mean, you have great schools in Manchester. Why going all the way to London? What got you there?
Yeah, well, actually, I didn't the first time. So I never tell this part of the story, but I went to Warwick University to study accounting and finance for all of 3.5 weeks. And then I dropped out. And at the time, I wasn't ready to really be back in education. I was so bored of doing exams. I'm deeply competitive. So if I'm going to do an exam, I want to come top. And I've never got less than an A. So I'm not that smart, but I'll work hard and I'll get the grade. And I just couldn't be asked going through that process again, jumping straight back into uni. I'd chosen Warwick because it was number one for accounting and finance that year in the kind of league tables or whatever. And that was I suppose it wasn't a deeply thought out decision. And I quickly got there and thought, fuck this. I want to be doing business stuff. I want to be making money. I just felt entrepreneurship resonated with me way more. It was just scary because, as I mentioned, my dad's a lawyer. I kind of brought up in a way that looked like a failure, or like, you're supposed to do a clever thing. Most of my mates were doing banking or consulting or law or whatever else. So I dropped out of that. I kept the business. And then that first year of running the events company, I realized, okay, I'm doing quite well. Like financially, I was doing okay. I had good people. I was like, there was some good with it, but I realized this wasn't going to be my career. Like the problems I was dealing with, the violence, the drugs, the issues you have running an events company, I was like, I'm selling myself short here. So I then realized I should go back to uni, but I didn't want to stop the business. So the next time I applied to uni, I only applied to London universities because I thought I need like an upgrade from Manchester. So I was either going to go abroad or go to London, but I wanted to keep my events company, which I ran the whole way through university. My offices were in Manchester, so it was very busy between London and Manchester. So I ended up getting into LSE, which is, one could argue, better than King's academically, but I realized I liked the culture of King's, I liked the people, I really liked the course. I was basically studying management, and part of me also thought I need to keep this business running. I'm working probably, 40, 50 hours a week when it's busy on that, and I'll have studying and presumably have to revise. So that was kind of my framework for the decision. And yeah, I wanted an upgrade on Manchester, and London felt like that at the time, and yeah, probably is.
So you went to London, then you tried a little bit of investment banking. We're also exploring what could be essentially another startup that you could do, another business that you could do, but you ended up joining another startup. So walk us through the motions there, through the sequence of events, because obviously joining, this other company, Tessian, was quite pivotal, no? Because it was the most immediate step for you to get to get started with your baby now, with Omnia, which is a smashing success. So walk us through what happened.
Back then, so I got out of this events business, ran it for like four and a half years or something, did quite well in the sense I'd made a bit of money, I'd like put myself through university, I was doing all right. Then I thought, I basically went existential. I was like, shit, what should I do? Because I got out of it in good terms. I now identified as an entrepreneur to some degree, but I'd also worked hard at university. I'd come I'd got a very good grade. I had all these doors open. So then I kind of got lost in sort of the rat race again. So I applied to MBB, McKinsey, Bain, BCG. I applied to some investment banks and I thought, right, shall I do consulting or banking? I just wanted to prove I was smart, I think. If I look back, it was kind of that I needed a stamp because I'd worked so hard to not collect that final stamp. It felt like a waste. In the end, I sold myself on the idea of a boutique investment bank being more entrepreneurial whilst also giving me some prestige. And that's why I chose Lazard. And I think Lazard's an amazing institution. And if I wanted to be an investment banker, I'd probably look at Lazard. I think they're really smart. But within 3 months of being there, I realized it was not playing to my strengths. There were people around me that would probably pick up financial modeling or whatever faster than me. I couldn't see how I'd be world class. I mean, I could have worked hard and maybe competed, but I just wasn't that excited. And the upside isn't there in these type of linear growth careers. So then I set about trying to start another company. And I was still like in this old economy mindset, being from Manchester, where I was like, okay, I'll start an alcohol brand. How could I pivot my events company? The guy I'd done events with in the later days, this guy called Ben Shalom, he stayed in events and he went on to run kind of boxing events. So he kind of pivoted the business model we had been doing with the sort of festivals and gigs and other things we'd been doing. He did events and he built that into a huge success. But at the time, I couldn't see that path. And I was thinking, well, I need a different career. I just don't know what. So I explored for ages. I remember there was no stone unturned, and it was not a fun phase because I was just spending money, not earning any. Everyone's getting on with their careers, and I felt really, really stuck. And then I met this guy, Tim Sadler, who had founded this business. I mean, at the time, it wasn't really a business. There was like 4 or 5 people with this idea. It was called Check Recipient. So it was a really shit name, and it had an awful logo, which is why it was barely a business. But these were these 3 guys, Tim, Tom, and Ed, who had co-founded Check Recipient, and they'd been kind of bumbling around for 2 or 3 years, changing ideas, kind of what to do. But they were doing a tech thing. It became email security. But at the time, what I realized is they seemed smart. I liked them. They just seemed like high integrity, reputable people, and they had a similar opportunity cost to me because they were relentless in their ambition. They wanted to start a business. And they had been bankers. So I thought, good. I didn't want to do business with people that had no opportunity cost. If you have no other options and you decide to start something, fair enough, good for you. But it's a bit different when I felt I had an opportunity cost. And so that resonated with me. I ended up joining what was kind of the founding team or the early team of this company, Check Recipient. And that was just before the seed round. And that, looking back now, is how I learned about this thing, VC, B2B SaaS, that whole model, which was totally alien to me. And I was kind of dragged through it, basically.
So at what point do you realize, with the journey at Tessian, because there you were in London, then you also New York, you also experienced a little bit like the Bay Area. At what point do you realize, hey, I think that maybe there's like something else for me? I think that maybe I'm prepared now for starting, because as they say, once an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur. I mean, and even all the way up to 18, you were starting your own companies, even though we're like way before, what you did, that first events business, as you were alluding to, but you had it in you. But it sounds like you felt, or maybe that you needed to really understand what that transition into tech may look like. It sounds like you were looking for getting a little bit more background and educated before making that jump again. What do you think triggered that jump?
Yeah, I think firstly that's a very kind way to look at it, because you could look at it like you're being dragged through stuff learning, and then with hindsight and connect the dots and make it sound linear. Or you can look at it and think, I needed to learn. I didn't know at the time I needed to learn this space to, it'll be a perfect stepping stone for another thing. And I treated that business as my own. I didn't own the whole thing, and economically I certainly didn't, which was painful. But I worked as if it was, and I made deep sacrifice for it. So yeah, when did I decide another? I think I always knew. Actually, I didn't always know. No, there was a point where I started to lose emotional ownership. I think post Series B. Tessian. So we raised this hypey round from Sequoia. We were really hot, great talent density, lots to be excited about. But a lot of decisions started to be made that I disagreed with, and they weren't all my decisions. And there was a deep sense of frustration with that. And I'm really good friends with Tim and all of the early team there. We're all good mates. So it was kind of open discussion, but equally, we were all unproven. And there was a lot of first timers in that room, right? So we started hiring these experienced execs who did this and did that. And I then sort of started to feel like I wanted to do it differently, and I was no longer satisfied. So that was kind of the start of the end in many ways. And we were all going through that journey, but I was getting more and more frustrated. And actually at Tessian, when I moved out to New York, I pushed too hard and I ended up becoming horribly depressed, really just in a very dark place for like a year and a bit. So I'd sacrificed such a great deal. And then the upside also wasn't there in the end economically from a few of the decisions we made. So that, then very amicably, I sort of started to plan my way out. And it was kind of like succession planning in that there were open discussions. I spoke to Tim, he knew my views. And then it was just, what will I do next though? Because, Tessian was a great business in so many ways, particularly those early days, very, very special people that many have gone on to do amazing things. If I was going to do something else, it had to be bigger and better and stronger than that. And that felt quite difficult. And we can kind of talk about that phase of like the exploration of what to do next. But I went through a similar journey I'd gone through the first time, but now with what felt like higher stakes and a higher bar for myself. So it was actually more difficult to settle on something.
So out of all things, why Omnia? How do you stumble across the idea of Omnia, and what was the founding, story of it?
Yeah, so looking back now, I can give you this in a tighter way. I mean, I accidentally knew about procurement from my time building Tessian. The story there is, so Tessian, for those that don't know, is an email security company, and we serve large enterprises. So we had pretty amazing customers. Most of the world's leading investment banks, law firms, loads of tech companies, they used our product for email security. And because we sold them our email security, I became exposed to the procurement process. And I hated it. It was awful. It was one of the most broken processes and functions of a business I'd ever come across. And I couldn't really understand. I thought, why is it so shit? What is going on here? And I felt bad for the people doing it because they were set up for failure and they had the wrong systems. And there were lots of parallels I could draw sort of between, if I think of what InfoSec, which was the space Tessian was building in back in 2017, because of GDPR and all of these different regulatory things happening, cybersecurity was going to become big. I noticed relevant things happening in the broader economy that would make procurement go bigger. There was a drive for capital efficiency because markets were tanking. There was an increased focus on risk and governance, and there was this AI thing, and that was going to change how we could run a lot of these manual processes. So that is why I ended up on procurement as a space, although actually I'm skipping kind of the truthful part of that, which is that's like the VC shiny story. That's how it works together. In truth, there were so many things I almost did before I settled on procurement and Omnia. I had researched so many different ideas, looked at so many different business models. I was pretty disillusioned at the time with venture and tech. I thought valuations went absurd in COVID. I just stopped believing in a lot of the market. So I was looking at roll-up strategies, traditional economy businesses. I almost started a premium ice company where I was like buying a manufacturing facility. And so, there were so many things that could have been. And then even in tech, I had term sheets for two different ideas that were not procurement or Omnia. But going back to the point before of like, Tessian was good, the bar was high. I could disqualify all of these things. And by the way, this is like a year and a half of solid work without anything to show for it. But I managed to disqualify those things and then realize, right, no, this procurement thing is the one. And I had a good foundational understanding of why it was the one, how big it could get. So a lot of people have these founding stories of how the first year of their business was exploring the space, speaking to people. I did that the year before the business, maybe even a year and a half before the business. And it was a really intensive experience. By the time I landed on it and committed, my conviction was high and I wasn't going to quit.
So now for the people that are listening to get it, what ended up being the business model of Omnia? How do you guys make money?
Enterprise software, basically. So it's funny, now I could almost say good old-fashioned enterprise software, but basically we have disrupted the pricing model in the market a bit because we will look at a company and say, what's your headcount roughly, right? You're 5,000 people. What integrations do you need? Here's the price. You'll pay that every year. It's not usage-based. It's not based on expensive admin licenses like some of the incumbent platforms. And increasingly, we're then embedding a lot of AI kind of automation and workflows in the platform. So there's all these agentic processes now in the platform, but we are not breaking them out separately to charge for them. Because actually, if you're a large corporation nowadays, you just need to know how much the thing's going to cost. You don't want to be told it might be 100 grand, but if you use it loads and somebody uses that agent, it might be 300 grand. How do they plan around that? So we are kind of disrupting the pricing model by allowing them to have certain levels of usage and certain agents with nice, simple pricing.
Now, for also for the people listening to what, because you guys have raised about 75 million. What has been and you guys are, really careful about the valuation, and you were talking about it too, and what you were seeing with COVID, which was insane when it came to valuations, and we saw what happened next, like with companies that were like too overvalued, down rounds, like resets. In terms of, for you guys, the 75 million and the experience and that journey from going through all those different life cycles and financing cycles, how did those rounds come together, and what were you learning from them? Because this is really the first hyper growth business that you've built yourself, like as a founder. So walk us through that.
Yeah, so I think firstly I did have probably an unusual amount of learnings from building Tessian, right? We raised over 130 mil from Sequoia, Excel, Balderton, and great VCs. So I understood the model, I knew a lot of the people, and I'd seen it. We'd been underwater at a moment in time, so I'd had that feeling too. So there are so many learnings in this, but my journey with Omnia has basically been me viewing fundraising as a rite of passage in a sort of, let me explain. So I don't want to raise as much as I can because I can. We could go raise another 100 mil now on a really punchy valuation. That doesn't mean we are any more successful than we are without doing that. And I think personally, you're asking me when markets are ripping, and I might look stupid saying this, but hopefully it ages well, but I don't think that's a good barometer of success. The way I like to view it is, right, what should a business look like? What do the market benchmarks indicate? Up to Series B, we used to use Christoph Janz's SaaS napkin for our benchmarks. And it's like, cool, this is what you need to get to. Maybe you raise a bit before those benchmarks, maybe you raise a bit after, but I want to stay grounded in reality. I want to speak openly as a company about why we're valued this way, how we're valued this way. At some point, the music always stops, right? And the markets wake up to the realities and the typical metrics you'd expect. So that's how I view this. And again, even same for the A, that round was slightly preempted, and similar for the B. So we've had a fortunate journey where I suppose there's been investor interest before we were necessarily hunting. But we have still kind of stayed true to what we believe in the sense we've kind of stayed sensible. And I believe it will become an advantage over time because we have learned to do more with less, and be more resourceful. Let's see though, right? When markets are like they are now, it is basically back to COVID times, if we're honest, right? In certain pockets of the market, you can get away with a lot. And I think a lot of companies out there are being forgiven for a lot of basically like lack of rigor and not actually executing that well, but from the outside it looks it. And I think there comes a time when that becomes obvious, and we want to be really strong in that moment and a good foundation, and that's why our fundraising strategy reflects that.
So obviously, whether it's investors or employees, they're always betting on a vision. So I think that to that end, let's say, Ben, you go to sleep tonight and you wake up in a world where the vision of Omnia is fully realized. What does that world look like?
I think there's so many aspects of this, but ultimately we want to be the system, the platform you go to if you work at a company and you need to do a thing relating to a supplier. Let's say you work at Spotify, they're one of our customers, and maybe you're in Spotify's marketing team. You want to sponsor a booth at a conference, or maybe you need a new system, or maybe you need to hire a contractor. We want Omnia to be ingrained in people's mind as a thing you go to get that done. So it makes the process really nice for the end user. There's a kind of a conversational intake thanks to AI where they just chat with a thing. Hey, I need this thing. It will suggest similar things. It goes through that process in a really easy way for them. And then on the back end, they don't even know this is happening, but it's taking the contract to legal. It's automatically analyzed it for the legal team and said, hey, here are the things to look out for. Same for the risk team. For the finance team, it cuts the PO, pushes it into the system so they can be paid. So it's kind of completely automating the back end, and we will be the platform everyone thinks of and uses for anything relating to a supplier. And then from a vision perspective, that's how it will look to the kind of person on the street who might not be in the weeds of the technology. But we are then allowing companies to build procurement and supplier management into an area of competitive advantage. Because if you think, like an analogy I'll give, if you look at business, right, what determines the productivity of a business? It's the people and the systems that they use. If you look at the effort a company puts into attracting, retaining, managing, et cetera, all their people, all of those systems, it's vast, right? Everyone knows that's a key focus and that's important. Look at the same for suppliers. How do they source, manage, choose, pay their suppliers? It's a complete disconnect. The process is disjointed. No one likes it. It's a mess. So if you can fix that, and you can be the company that makes that a competitive advantage, it completely changes the trajectory of those businesses that you work with.
Now, you were talking about when you said, imagine you work at a company. That kind of like reminded me of how obsessed you guys are when it comes to hiring. Why is that the case?
Yeah, I think this is one of my key learnings from Tessian, but also that first events business. I was talking how everyone says it's all about the people. It really is. What does that mean for me? We have a very sort of specific equation with regards to what we're looking for, and how we weigh that up. So we have values and we hire against those values, but I won't go through all of those now because it would be a very long explanation. But essentially, we want to be incredibly fussy. We believe it is a compounding strategy if you have the best people willing to give more to that business and to that mission and to that team. So we would rather pass on an 8 out of 10 person, even if we spend 10 hours with them and like they're solid, they'd be decent, not bad. That for us won't work at this stage. Ask me again when we're 1,000 people. I haven't got there. Maybe we need to change how we do it. But my view, and the best businesses I know do this for as long as they can, is that we want those special people. And so our approach takes into account how hard that is. There's no easy, hacky way to do that. Part of me doing this podcast is because we're trying to improve employer branding, and it shouldn't be so outbound heavy. So there's some hacks you can maybe do to make it easier. But basically, we need good people to find us, or we need to find them. And then when we find them, it's a very intensive process. You meet a lot of people. There's practical challenges, and then it's just holding a high bar. So it's, I won't go through the exact process we run, but it's a very, very rigorous process. The type that if somebody gets through and gets an offer, they feel it. It's not like, oh, I wonder if I'll take that one. Like you can't have got through the Omnia process and not be sure if you want it or not. It's too much effort. But you'd quit along the way, and that's partly intentional, right? We want the people who might quit to quit along the way before they join us.
That's amazing. Now, we were talking about the future before. I want to talk about the past with a lens of reflection, right? I mean, imagine I put you into a time machine now, Ben, and I bring you back in time, with all the lessons, all the learnings, all the insights, and I'm able to put you right there back in university when you were thinking about whether it made sense or not to drop out and venturing into the unknown and being a founder. Let's say you're able to give your younger self one piece of advice before launching a business. What would that be and why, given what you know now?
If it's one piece of advice, I have to keep it simple. I'm probably then going to add bits on at the end, but it's probably if I could really talk to myself in a way that I was listening. I think it's this idea of like time spent worrying is time wasted, right? I would try and urge myself to be proactive and just work towards things. And basically, it's this notion that you don't know what's going to happen. I couldn't give myself advice like, go invest in Meta. It will do really well, right? That's probably a bullshit answer to that question. But I think it's this idea that you don't know where it's all going to go. I can connect the dots now for you afterwards. And who knows, maybe in 5 years, I'll connect the dots again and it was all a shit show and how unfortunate that I took that series of events. Who knows? But I think the point is, you've got to have a mindset that you just get on with it. And it sounds trivial, but I spent so long worrying and existential and stressed. And sometimes that was making me work harder, so it was okay. And I'll accept that. But generally, if I could have the attitude of like, I'm going to get to wherever it is I'm looking to get to, it's about the speed of iteration and just fucking getting on with it. Just do the thing. You'll learn another thing. You'll do events and you'll realize events is a shit industry and you won't do that again. Cool. The faster you learn that, the better. So just get on with it and on to the next one. And I think that mindset to life just makes me a happier person. Hopefully a more successful person as well when it comes to business. But I think it's as I'm getting older now and I'm seeing kind of the next generation of entrepreneurs come up beneath me. I was usually the young guy and now like people ask me stuff as if I have answers. But I think that's it. It's that all this stress and worrying for people that put pressure on themselves, it's not always the most productive way to get to an outcome.
That's so profound, Ben. Being intentional about where you allocate the energy. So that's really spectacular. Ben, for the people that are listening that would love to reach out and say hi and also learn more about Omnia, what's the best way for them to do so?
They can email me, I suppose, ben.f@omnia.co or get us on LinkedIn. I'm responsive.
Easy enough. Well, Ben, thank you so much for being on the Dealmaker Show today. It has been an absolute honor to have you with us.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.